Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you on this session today. Thank you for joining the Iowa Intermediary Network for the Cost of Ag. We really hope that you participate in this session by putting your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to those when we have time. But we do have some really important content to cover today about the cost of ag. So we want to welcome our presenters, Paul from Iowa PBS. We also want to thank Dave from Iowa PBS for all of his work in putting this session together. We also have Sally from Practical Farmers of Iowa and Dale from People's Bank. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
Thank you so much, Gina, and welcome to the Cost of Ag. So one of the first thoughts probably that comes to mind when you think of purchasing farmland is the cost. And really, we've seen quite a lot of fluctuation over the last year. So really, how has the land value and cost fluctuated? And with some insight, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to kind of expand on the price and the cost that we're seeing right now.
Thank you so very much, and greetings from the Market to Market television program based at Iowa PBS. Good to have the opportunity to discuss this. And each and every week, our show is split into two halves. One is about the news of the day, and the other is breaking down the commodity markets. And right now, the two are usually tied together. And one of the things that comes out later next month is a land survey from Iowa State University, one that comes out usually right before Thanksgiving. And we kind of always look to see that as guidance. And one thing that has been talked about, in fact, even before we started rolling today, was a piece of land that sold in Grundy County, Iowa for $22,600. Now, it's an 80-acre plot, and it does have a wind turbine on it. So there was part of the issue. But we had the opportunity for a couple of weeks to ask some of our market analysts about the buying of land and what it is exactly is a hurdle to clear to get into the farming business. And one of them is land. And Jeff French is one of our newest additions to the Market to Market lineup. He's actually a guy that lived out of Chicago, worked in Chicago, but has since moved back to Iowa. He's still advising people on the commodities, but he's also trying to get into to farming himself and buy some land. So he clearly knew when we asked him this question about one of the biggest hurdles, what it is out there that he's trying to clear. And Jeff French gave us this answer when we asked him that exact question.
It's capital. I mean, we're in, rare times right now. 5 counties in Iowa during the month of August, last month, broke price records for the price of farm ground being sold. New all-time highs. 5 counties in the state of Iowa alone. And then you had the highest price, $22,600 an acre. So unfortunately, you're not competing against your neighbor farmers anymore, because right now there's investors and there's high wealth individuals that want to park their money into hard assets. And again, $5 corn, we have this inflationary money flow out there. This might be a time to just have a little patience here. I've been in this business 16 years. We've had $5 corn 3 times in my career. And in each of those times, $5 corn, within 18 months, corn was right back below the cost of production. Is it going to happen this time? I have no idea. But 3 for 3 is a pretty strong trend. And high prices tend to cure high prices. I mean, the world is going to respond to these prices. I mean, they're going to plant it. As long as Mother Nature cooperates, they're going to plant the acres. So I think right now, I mean, it's challenging because, again, you're dealing with people that have a lot of money, and they know the value of farm ground and parking it into a hard asset right now. Again, they're not going to be here forever, but I think right now you just have a little patience. But it's a great career, and if you want it, it takes time. Nobody starts out, unless it's given to them, farming 2,000, 3,000 acres. They started with 250 or 300 acres, and it takes decades to get up there. So, if you want it, you got to get it, and it's going to come down to you.
Certainly sounds daunting a little bit there, Ann, doesn't it?
It is. And Sally, when you're having conversations with farmers, what are they saying about the cost of the current land market?
Well, especially beginning farmers, the cost of land is their number one barrier to entry into farming. So it certainly is an issue, particularly for those beginning farmers. But as he was just saying, even for established farmers looking to increase their acreage. So we have seen an influx of beginning farmers in Iowa, fortunately, in the last 2 ag censuses, but their number one barrier is access to farmland.
And our friend Dale in the banking industry, what are your conversations with those trying to enter the land market right now?
Yeah, I've had this conversation over the last 20 years, and every time we talk about it, it's always too much. But we've had people that have bought it and have made it work, type of deal over the past 20 years, type of deal. So there's opportunities, but you got to position yourself right and have some downstroke into the purchase. But it always seems like every time you want to buy land, it's more than you want to pay.
And really, Dale, when somebody's wanting to get into the profession of being a farmer and they come into the bank to meet with a lender, what information or what should they be bringing with them at that conversation?
Yeah, so great question. If they want to get into it, they really have to have done their research, to have a plan of, okay, here's what I would like to do. I would like to farm an 80-acre piece, or I'd like to farm a 40 with my uncle, or I'd like to do this, and know their numbers. That's the biggest thing that they need to understand is what will the ground produce? What type of price do we have? What kind of expenses will it take to put that crop in and harvest that crop? And then what can we net off that per acre? If you could make $100 an acre and you would get 80 acres, that's $8,000. Well, obviously you're going to need something to subsidize your living or something like that, because that $8,000 an acre or $8,000 per year, and 80 acres won't handle it. So the plan becomes I want to do this, but how else are you going to make that happen? Because you won't be able to just, like they said, just start with 2,000 acres, like they said on the video.
Yeah, in fact, I actually have the USDA average in their data says in 2019, the average farm size in Iowa was 359 acres. And that was actually up a few acres from the 2018 data. So the statement that, farm sizes, you've got to start small is very true. And that acre-wise is growing per farm, but maybe fewer entering the market because of the cost right now. And then looking at when land becomes available in Iowa, there's about 85% of the land is farmable at this point. So that's roughly 30 million acres of land. So we really get into that. How do we begin acquiring it? So we've thought about, wanting to go into the profession of farming and looking at, obviously the cost right now is a little scarier, could turn some people away from the profession and the lifestyle that it brings with it. But really, how do you know when land becomes available, and what are some of the steps that farmers or those wanting to join the market look at in acquiring that farmland? So Sally, what is your conversation with those that are really wanting to either increase their acres or begin as a new farmer?
Network. It's something like only 2% of farmland actually is listed on the open market. It's something ridiculous. Usually investors are already on the prowl and neighbors are already aware. So talking to more people, let them know that you're interested, what you're interested in, what your infrastructure and land size needs are. And then as Dale is saying, get your numbers ready so you can be loan ready. If you're a beginning farmer, you need at least 3 years of production records, especially if you're doing something besides corn or soybeans. And a lot of beginning farmers are doing alternative crops kind of for 2 reasons. One, it's easier to enter at a smaller scale, having livestock or specialty crops. And 2, they do have this want to, feed feed their communities, but they still need the numbers and they still need to show that the income they produce will be greater than the expenses that they have. But really, it's that networking piece is super important, especially, over half of the land in Iowa is rented out. Many people are farming land that they don't own. And sometimes that's where you enter. You show that you have some experience, you rent, and you might be making relationships all the while with that farmland owner where you can enter into a long-term lease or a contract kind of sale kind of thing. So it's really about making those relationships and getting your numbers down, and also writing a business plan, which is maybe farmers' least favorite thing to hear, but it's of utmost importance for them to know their numbers, both to go to the bank as well as to be able to make informed decisions on their own for where their gains and losses are.
Sally. And Paul, what are the conversations, especially with market to market? What are the conversations centered around as far as acquiring land to either grow their farm size or to get into the market?
Well, there's a discussion that we have on the show, but it's also a discussion I have in my own personal life with somebody who farms some land that's in our family, and he just lost 2 farms. The owner was someone he'd never met, and he had tried to communicate with that person to tell what his situation was, and it was just hard to do. And sometimes that's what happens. It's the second or third generation removed from the farm that has sold it, and that discussion is really hard to have, like Sally was mentioning. And that's something now on our own land in Buchanan County, that is the gentleman that's farming our land now is someone that we knew, and it wasn't networking. And the old commentary, it's not a joke, is that some farmers will come to the funeral to start networking with the widow to say, I want to farm that land. And that's an unfortunate part of this discussion, but that is sometimes how desperate some people are. And that's, again, just a story, but we all nod our heads and know that we've heard those things. Now, Naomi Bloom is another one of those market analysts that we have on the show. She is based in Wisconsin. She comes from a farm, and anybody who's participated in our classroom efforts that we've done at Market to Market has maybe heard some of her comments about starting farming. And I asked her some of the same questions that I did to Jeff French, and she talks about building your team. And it's not just doing it alone. And that's kind of a theme, I think, that we're discussing. And this is what Naomi Bloom had to say from her position in her brokerage in Wisconsin.
I think similar to what they have been in years past, as far as you have to build your team. And you have to have a lot of hats that you wear. So you're building a team with maybe a local neighbor, your lender, you're wanting to work with an insurance agent. You need to maybe talk to your extension agent, because they can help you with cost of production sheets. So you're thinking like a business person, but you also need to talk to your local elevator to know and keep track of, what is Basis doing, or what is their delivery schedule. So you just need to have those conversations and build those relationships. Tricky now to come into farming when prices, of course, are high. So I remember this 2012, 2013, 2014. Everything goes through the roof, land prices go up, rents go up. We're already starting to hear about it. So this would be a harder time to come in. But then, of course, when farming and agriculture is in the slumps, it's not as attractive, and it's not as fun, and it's harder work. So, I think it also goes back to the FFA creed. And if you grew up with it, you probably have it memorized still, or parts of it. I keep it right on my wall in front of me at my desk, because there's good times and there's bad times in agriculture. So if you love it, you work through it, right? So don't get discouraged. I mean, the lifestyle is wonderful. We still have amazing people in agriculture who truly just want the best for agriculture and our country. And these are the people, these are the core. This is the part of America that is the best. So if you want to become part of that team, awesome, do it.
It is hard to not get caught up in the enthusiasm Naomi has for agriculture, and not to make a pitch for any specific business. Her services too are something that she helps with, and all of our analysts do, with clients, potential customers, and working through, similar to what you might hear in the banking industry, Ann.
Yes, very important. And she is very enthusiastic about it. And I do believe in the future of agriculture. So for any of our FFA members that are joining today, I'm many years removed from FFA, but remember the creed very well. So Dale, when that we've talked about the business plan and making sure they have that and bringing that in when they have conversations with you, what also will they need if they're thinking about buying either 40 acres or 80 acres? What about the quality of the land? Does that play into any of the data that you look at, whether to grant the loan for that?
Yeah, and if they're into land and they're gonna know that and have probably talked to the realtor or talked to somebody, and that's going back to what Paul's panel said about having your team. You need to have somebody to walk you through that. And there's the CSR rating, which is the Iowa Corn Suitability Rating, the CSR. You hear CSR 1 and CSR 2, and that will basically give you a good idea of how productive that ground is. And then really finding out what the history has been on that ground. So, you know, if you come with a low CSR and say you're going to annually generate 275 bushels per acre, well, that's probably not going to equate. You know, the state average for the state of Iowa is 178 based off the number of years, but there's also, we hear 300 bushels, we hear 250, we hear 200. So you got to know what your land is, and that will go into that price. And so as you come in and have done your research, know what that land can produce, what that CSR rating is. We'll look at it. You know, how many is it, net acres and those type of things. The one thing to remember on what we in the banking industry have moved to since after the 80s, when we had our big issue with land, was now most lending institutions try to get that payment per year in that range that would equate to rent or more, but not substantially more. So one thing to do is back down and say, okay, if I'm paying $10,000 an acre, if I borrow $5,500 per acre, that nets out to about $333 per acre payment over a 25-year deal. So we try to get that payment of the land down to what rent would be. So if we do go through some years where it gets a little bit tight, we could pay interest and kick it to the next year, and that rent payment does it. What happened in the 80s, if you remember, we had too much, price was too low and the payments were too high, and too much land got put on the market because they couldn't hold it because they could not pay the interest or keep up with the payment.
Yes, the farm crisis of the 80s is very relevant. And I know Iowa PBS also has part of their market-to-market classroom has a module based on the farm crisis of the 80s. Paul, do you have any pitch for that special module on the market-to-market classroom?
Well, if we would have done this about 30 minutes ago, I would have pulled Laurel, who produced that documentary, into here. And her and I have discussed this and her work in the past. And while Dale was talking, I just wrote down a couple of things. So sometimes when I've had these same questions to our analysts, you know, they remind us about who you're competing against, and it's big money. I mentioned Jeff French trying to buy some money. He's like, he was talking to a lending or at least a land broker about, well, what's this going for? What do you hear is going to go? And it's too rich for his blood. And he's hearing maybe not Bill Gates type money, but money of that nature, big firms, outside money, because what we're seeing is the equities are producing so well and people are looking for a place to park their money. They're buying land. What's the, you know, we always know what's always going to appreciate in value? Land. They're not making any more of it. It's going to go up in value. It's a common thing. It's similar in the housing market. Then back to what Dale was saying right at the end, as things come on to the market, how high will they stay and for how long? We're already starting to see a little bit of steam come out of the housing market for a couple of reasons, because so many people are putting their property on for sale. So it's similar to the housing market. Back to the the farm crisis doc. That was cut up, as you said, in our classroom. So if you search market to market classroom, that is still today, that module is 5 years old. It's still one of the most searched and looked at terms we have on our website each and every week. So I know it gets used in classrooms, but it's always a good reminder of what can happen and what has happened in the past. As Naomi said, she remembers 2012, 13, and 14. Most of our audience was barely alive at that time, let alone knowing what's going on in the market. So it's always just a good refresher.
Sally, what insight do you have, or the expertise of the conversations again with the farmers that you're working with about the quality right now, and the cost, and just how to acquire that?
I mean, as Paul and Dale are kind of alluding to, farming is all about ups and downs. So in an ideal situation, you look at the long term, and I know you have to make your cash flow each year, but it really is a long-term game. So knowing those numbers and knowing that we need farmers, desperately need farmers. The average age right now of a farmer is 57, and that's continuing to increase. There are opportunities there. It's not easy to enter, and it's not an easy profession, but it's an extremely fulfilling one. So doing the due diligence of the homework and looking at alternative ways to enter are both, there are a lot of alternative ways than buying land to enter into farming. I think one other aspect that's really important is talking about farm transfer. Sometimes that's a taboo conversation among families, which is really unfortunate because then the farmer or wife passes away and they haven't transferred their wishes in a clear way into legal terms to help the next generation fulfill what their wishes are. And when that happens, all too often it does go to investors and not carry on the legacy that the farmer had built. So it is possible to plan for the next generation of your land. And it's even more important these days when 75% of new farmers are not that next generation. More and more, the next generation are going off farm. So that farm transfer conversation is an extremely important one to have.
I'll change gears just a little bit because a majority of our participants watching today are students. So thinking back as a student yourself, what do you wish you would have known about either the Iowa farm market or becoming a farmer? What mentorship piece of advice could you give to those students that are thinking, this is something I want to maybe pursue, but I just, there's questions. What kind of guidance and words of advice would you go back and give yourself, back as a 14, 15, 16, up to 18-year-old student that's watching today? So Paul, I'll turn it over to you for that question.
Well, I'm a child of the 80s, and I remember the conversation well with my father in the barn as we were sorting cattle one day. And he was just like, you're going to have to go find something else to do. There's just not going to be a place for you. We were under 500 acres. We were under that average at that time. It just wasn't something. And I enjoy the marketing side of things. I enjoy understanding how markets work. For the sake of argument, I enjoy the act of harvest and planting. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot of work in the middle. I did not like picking up rock. I'll just flat out admit it. That wasn't my favorite. I didn't mind walking beans. Picking up rock was my least favorite, but I knew it was a job that had to be done. In fact, I was just in a farm field in near Dyke and Applington or Parkersburg the other day. There was a rock in the end row, and I actually picked up that rock and put it into the fence row so it didn't get hit by the bean head. Force of habit, I'm sorry. What would I have known? I would like to think I view market to market, for sure, our Market Plus section, a chance to answer questions each and every week that come from people who are actively engaged. I know some things change and some things stay the same. Take advantage of those programs that are out there that give you an opportunity to ask questions. Usually there is not a fee for asking a question, the majority of places. Specifically us, that is what we are here to do. I would say take advantage of programs like ours. And if there's something you don't understand, ask it. Because that's the thing about farmers. They get prideful and think they say they know what something is. There's a good chance they don't. You probably have the exact same question that a bunch of other people have. I don't know, Anna, if that answers your question, but that's my take on it.
Thanks, Paul. Dale, what do you wish you would have known, or what piece of advice would you like to give high school students that might be participating with us today?
Find a mentor. Find somebody out there that's out there actively involved. Farmers love to teach their craft to other people who are interested, and that's the best way to get a firsthand deal of what's going on the farm and some of that. And seems like the farmers I know are always looking for somebody to help out on a weekend or help some type of stuff. So find a mentor that is involved and ask them questions and develop that relationship. Back to what Sally said, networking, and you can't ever start too quick.
And Sally, what are your thoughts on going back to that high school version of yourself and what you wish you maybe would have known or learned?
Well, I bet Paul would have been really happy to hire some teenager to pick up rocks on the weekends. So I would say be curious and be, as an Iowan or a Midwestern, if people are tuning in from the Midwest, it's our civic responsibility to understand agriculture. It is a big deal in Iowa and it's really complicated. So be curious, learn about our supply chains, learn about the agronomics of farming, learn about how to grow fruits and vegetables, plant a backyard garden, just start and see where that curiosity takes you. But do it as a responsible student, and that will probably help lay some foundation for your future, whether it's an ag or not, because we all eat. Farming affects our natural resources in positive and negative ways. So being knowledgeable about different practices, different farmers, and about how farmers contribute to their local community are all things that students can engage in. There are, as Dale said, a lot of opportunities on farms to work, and that's a really good way to understand what farming really is. People usually either think farming sucks, or they think it's this dreamy profession. And it's really both of those things, or neither one of those things, right? I mean, it's long hours, it's a lot of hard work. You have autonomy, you're working outside, it's this magical thing, but there's a lot of work, repetitiveness to it, because it is, growing food and grain for people. So be curious and be engaged and ask a lot of questions, like Dale said.
As our time kind of comes to a close, are there any final thoughts from our panelists that you'd like to share? Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
I do. And I have one more quick thing. I do want to say I've been having the markets up to my side just to talk about, like Sally was saying, the ups and downs of things. The soybean contract has lost 5 cents or gained 5 cents today after we're below $12. We're about below $5 in corn. So things change in a hurry. 2 weeks ago, that was a different discussion. John Roach is our senior market analyst. He's been on the show since the beginning. John has a perspective of a number of years, but he also hits on similar terms. And I'm going to let John kind of summarize my final thoughts. Someone trying to
find somebody who needs a person your age to help work their farm, and they'll do some sort of a deal that over time you start to accumulate some assets and some land and so forth, so that you'll be able to continue the farming career. You're going to have to find somebody who's willing to help you do that. And the interesting thing is there's quite a few people out there that are in that position. I talk to farmers all the time that their biggest situation or worry or problem is, I have no one to come farm my farm. And they want to keep it they'd like to stay involved until they die, but they're old, and so there's opportunities for young people. But if you're going to get into a multi-million-dollar business and you're trying to start doing that and you're in your 20s, you're going to have to be really good to do that. I don't care what industry you go into. If you go into agriculture, that's one with high capital requirements, and most 20-year-olds I know don't have high capital situations. So you have to find somebody who needs your labor and who needs your strength and your youth. And that's what you have to offer.
He said it for me. Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Paul. Definitely, we've heard a lot about having a business plan, networking, doing your research, be willing to do the work, learning the ups and downs. And so I'm going to send it back to Gina as we close out our session for today.
Well, we just want to thank all of our expert panelists. We're so happy you could join us today and really appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing with students about your knowledge of agriculture and the cost of ag with students across our state and potentially even the Midwest. So appreciate your time. And on behalf of the Iowa Intermediary Network, we hope you all will join us for a future session as well. Thank you.